I'd like to welcome aboard, before I welcome my co-host, Mike Iwanowicz, Deacon of Our Lady of Sorrows Roman Catholic Church. Deacon Mike, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Chuck. Good to be here once more on a Tuesday.
And, of course, let me welcome my co-host, Dr. Patrick O'Heffernan from Los Angeles. Patrick, how are you?
I'm pretty good. And hi, Mike. Good to hear your voice, although I think we need to boost your microphone a level a bit because it's hard to hear your voice.
Here we go. Mike, Cardinal O'Malley, Sean O'Malley, this past weekend put out a letter for all parishioners in the Archdiocese of Boston talking about this recent issue with regard to a healthcare mandate that mandates chemical abortions at coverage for employees of Catholic institutions. What was in that letter, Mike?
Well, basically, he had taken his cue from the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, and about 2 weeks ago, after the ruling by the HHS, excuse my voice, but after the ruling, the bishops, as I say, the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops issued a letter in general, and then almost to a person, every bishop, archbishop, cardinal throughout the country directed something similar using that skeleton letter and indicating that it was as I don't have the exact words, a grievous offense to the idea of religious freedom, forcing hospitals, institutions, etc., to make a choice, either to violate the principles of their church faith or to face the penalties of not offering the so-called free contraceptives as part of the affordable health care. So the letter was basically 2 or 3 paragraphs indicating displeasure with what had happened from HHS and asking Catholics to register their disapproval by letting congresspeople know what exactly is at stake.
Now, what has been the response? The Catholic Council of Bishops has come out against this. What has been the response by the average Catholic parishioner? Are they with the church on it or not? Is there any way to break that down?
Well, I think, again, using the so-called phrase, the person in the pew, if you will, is perhaps maybe broken down into not exactly knowing, being aware of what happened in the depth of it. And many people, of course, in the pews just do not follow that mandate of using only natural birth control anyway. And so it's almost irrelevant to the average person.
But yet the issue is whether or not Catholic institutions have to pay for their employees' chemical abortions. Now, is there a clamor among the employees of Catholic institutions for that coverage?
I'm not sure, Chuck, exactly when you ask the question. Is there a clamor for people who work in these hospitals, or I'm not sure your question.
In other words, the coverage covers only employees of Catholic institutions. It doesn't force the hospital itself to offer this. And so my question is, do employees of Catholic institutions nationally, do they want this coverage? Is there any indication that this is an issue? I mean, is this something that's come up recently, or is there anything on that?
Well, as I understand it, a Catholic hospital, for example, would offer to its employees, Catholic or not, health care. And among the various provisions of the health care, now they're being mandated to offer a variety of things with no copay or no particular way of being, it's free, affordable health care as part of the insurance plan being offered, whether the employees who are receiving this insurance are Catholic or not. But there's no sense of people saying, we really need this, a grassroots push for it. It came from HHS.
Right,
hold on,
well,
gentlemen.
that's what I'm asking about.
And something we need to do right now is cut to our radio affiliate. So when we do that, we'll be right back. You're listening to Fairness Radio with Chuck and Patrick. Stay with us.
And for our Blog Talk radio listeners, we are taking a break to bring in our terrestrial radio stations. And don't forget, you can email us at fairnessradio@gmail.com.
Radio with Chuck and Patrick here on the Cyber Station USA Radio Network and our affiliate stations as well. If you'd like to take part in our conversation, 424-675-6806 is the number. And you can also send us an email any time of the day or night, as many of you already have, and that's at fairnessradio@gmail.com. But now I'll send it back to our host of the most, Chuck Morris, and Dr. Patrick O'Heffernan. Gentlemen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Lars, and I'd like to welcome aboard our affiliate stations, WNPR in Tampa Bay, Florida, and KRKQ-FM in Ashland, Oregon, along with our online partners, blogtalkradio.com. You're listening to Cyberstation USA Radio Network, Fairness Radio with Chuck and Patrick. This is yours truly, Chuck Morse, along with Dr. Patrick O'Heffernan, and we've got Mike Iwanowicz in the studio from Our Lady of Sorrows Roman Catholic Church. We're talking religion, and in that vein, during the Cyberstation segment, we were talking about this mandate coming out of Health and Human Services, part of the Obama health plan, that will require or mandate Catholic institutions to cover such things as chemical abortions and sterilizations for their employees. Patrick, would you like to weigh in on this?
Well, yes, I would. First of all, I'd like to bring some facts in. You asked about is there a clamor from Catholic women or employees at those hospitals for this? The PRRI poll, that is the Public Religion Research Institute, released a poll today showing that a majority of Americans, 55%, agree that employers should be required to provide their employees with health care plans that cover contraceptions at no cost. 60%, actually 58-point-something% of Catholics believe that employers should be required to provide their employees with health care plans that cover contraceptive at no cost. So more Catholics than general American population want these kinds of insurance coverage. Among Catholic voters, 52% want this kind of insurance coverage. So there's no huge political outpouring against the Obama administration by Catholic voters at all. That's just a myth that's been brought up by various conservative pundits. Only half of white Catholics support the requirement, however, so it's 50-50 there. And they also point out that Catholic women want these kinds of health care plans that cover contraceptive at no cost by 62%. So more Catholic women want them. So the church is not on the same side as its the people in the pew. Secondly, I'd like to point out that there are no chemical abortions involved. This is the provision of birth control. There are no such things as chemical abortions. That's a myth that's been brought up by the anti-choice people, and it requires that you believe that a fetus is a baby, which over half of Americans don't believe. So we just want to inject those little facts in this. And thirdly, point out that the administration agreed this morning to revise its position and to take another look at it and find a way in which it can provide fair coverage for all women, but not violate the precepts of the Catholic Church. And as I pointed out in our blog last night, there's an easy way to do that, and that is to just recognize that if the insurance doesn't cover contraceptive, women are getting a less valuable insurance policy than men, and just charge them less for it. Some women will use the savings to buy birth control. Others may donate it to Catholic charities, but it's totally out of the Church's hands at that point and totally in the hands of the women.
Patrick, I just want to respond before Mike comes in. First of all, on your point number one, that doesn't answer my question. My question is whether or not employees of Catholic institutions, and that specifically would be women who are sexually active, is there any clamor on their part to have their employer, their Catholic employer, pay for these services? That's, we could talk about in general a poll that polls Catholics. I'm talking specifically about the employees of these hospitals. As far as the term chemical abortion, that is that is a reference to the morning after pill. It's a morning after the use of chemical means to abort the fertilized egg. And you can say it's this or that. I think that it's perfectly reasonable to refer to that as a chemical abortion because that's actually what it is. And on your third point, you say that now the Obama administration has given some kind of a waiver to Catholic institutions on this.
No,
How did that work?
It said it would consider revising the mandate in a way that allows women to have access to birth control at no cost, but does not require participation by Catholic organizations.
Oh, okay. Mike, what do you have to say on that?
Well, that sounds like maybe the effect of 70% of the bishops, cardinals, archbishops in this country who asked the pastors in every parish throughout this country to read the letter of some serious difficulty for the church itself. And perhaps now HHS, Catherine Sebelius, and Obama have taken this to heart and are beginning to take a second look at how this mandate really is much more than just saying you should offer free contraceptive care, but you should now give up this idea of religious liberty, and you'll be forced to do something which is inimical to your belief structure. And I think that's the even bigger issue than whether we're talking about artificial contraception and those issues. We're talking about the ability of this state to force a church, a faith, to forget their principles. I think that's the bigger issue.
That's probably
That's
true.
exactly the issue. I hope that that's coming across because it is bigger than whether or not individual Catholics support abortion. It has to do with the right of a religion to, within reasonable bounds, observe their faith.
Well, I agree with you, Mike, but you also have to keep in mind that the White House got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of emails and letters and phone calls from people who support this. So they're balancing the two of them off.
How many work for Catholic hospitals? I mean, it's really an interference in a private
Chuck,
institution.
if you want that data, I'm afraid you're going to have to go do that survey yourself.
I don't think it's been done, Patrick. And that's the key issue, not whether or not the population at large. If the population at large, I mean, does the population at large have a right to impose itself on a religious institution?
If it
anyway,
works
we have
within
to
the
hold it there.
Constitution,
And he's answered the question. He doesn't believe it's immoral. He believes abortion has the same immoral equivalence as clipping your toenails, which is exactly what I thought you believed, Patrick. But I want you to hear you say that. As far as Christianity having something to do with promoting, as you said, greed and power, I don't think so. I think that greed and power is something that comes about by concentrations of power in our secular world. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It certainly has nothing to do with the Bible. But maybe, Mike, you want to weigh in on this.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about the question that's prompted this conversation, the question of morality, the question of how it's defined by individuals or perhaps by groups. I think, first of all, of a great quote by a French philosopher, theologian, and mathematician, Blaise Pascal. I've mentioned this before. He had this idea that he put it this way: the first principle of morality is to think clearly. And that was the substance of much of his philosophical discussions in a great book, Les Pensées. I think, as far as the church is concerned, we have many people doing years and years of study and research and develop what's referred to as a theology of morality, or moral theologians. And they look at the scripture and they look at the various people in the church over 2,000 years who have opined themselves to ask the question and to indicate what might be a system of ethics, if you will. Many people look at the Gospel of Matthew and say, from chapter 5 onward, he had 5 chapters where he expounded on a whole Christian view of morality. So there is much to be done in that area, and it's not just what one person particularly thinks, but what others who have gone before him. Chuck?
No, I mean, I think in Judaism it's the same in that there are centuries of rabbinic decisions that go all the way back to the days of the Pharisees, which of course drew their inspiration from the Torah, that have examined for hundreds of thousands of human hours, and these are people who are very qualified to do it in terms of their own moral stature. The definition of what is moral, they derive it from the Torah, but they don't. It's not necessarily a literal interpretation of the Torah. It's an effort that has moved civilization along. It's not that an individual can suddenly wake up and decide to invent their own morality in a given day, what you might call situational ethics. It is a process that's been going on for thousands of years of trial and error. And I think that the Christian understanding, or the Judeo-Christian understanding, that rights come from the Creator, that rights, inherent human rights, or what's called in Blackburn's dictionary, natural law, is something that comes from morality. It comes from, and Jefferson, I think, expressed this best in the Constitution when he said that it's self-evident. You know, there are things that even a child understands are moral and immoral, and it's not because they're just making it up. There are things that are natural to us that we know that's right and wrong. A lot of it does surround the issue of human life and protecting human life. But, Patrick, I want to get back to the issue of Christianity. And, by the way, Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but was there anything in any of this moral understanding that advocated greed and power?
First of all, I have to make some corrections. That was the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution, that said that rights come from the Creator.
Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. I'll also point out that situational ethics is not what somebody comes up on a daily basis. That goes back many thousands of years. I'd also like to point out that, yes, to answer your question, well, first of all, you're also missing the subtlety of my answer on abortion. I said that I don't think that it's that there's an immoral act, but I leave it up to a woman to decide because I can't have an abortion. So there's a subtlety there. But yes.
So you said it was moral, Patrick. You actually said you think it's moral, but ultimately because you can't have one, you can't have any right to say anything about it either way, which of course is ludicrous.
That's correct. So
yes.
I give a woman the freedom to make that decision. I believe in freedom. Unlike a lot of conservatives. And incidentally, you've also changed the word conservative to Christian. I was talking about conservatives, not Christians. So let's make sure that we're talking about right here. Okay, now, are there examples of greed and power? There certainly are. There's an entire genre of Christianity in this country called the prophet gospels or the prosperity gospels, in which the preachers stand up and they preach you should invest in real estate and you should buy foreclosed homes and you should do things like that because God wants it. Now, there was also Calvinism, which preached a similar kind of a theology in which that God only really favors those who get rich, and if you're poor, obviously you're an evil person. Those are used to facilitate the denigration of the poor. They're used to facilitate the robbing of the poor and the middle class. And I will also point out that when we have these moral debates with conservatives, they're always focusing on marriage, gays, sex, and homophobia. They always seem to forget about the 4 million people who've been robbed of their homes by banks, as if it's not a sin, it's not immoral to throw people out of their homes. It's not a sin, it's not immoral to steal millions of dollars from people by slipping little things into their credit card. It's not a sin to invade countries that aren't at war with us and then kill hundreds of thousands of their people. Somehow they only get to focus on these three things, and I'm saying that's what I object to, and I'm not going to have that conversation. If we're going to talk about morals, we have to talk about illegally stealing homes, and we have to talk about illegally killing Iraqis, and we have to talk about all of the other things that are immoral, too. We're not just going to focus on those particular things that conservatives like to focus on because it allows them to take power to advance their agenda. That's what I mean about this. And as far as some of those outcomes, we should take a look at the Anoka School District in Minnesota, which has seen the suicide death of 16 gay teenagers since the beginning of the year, and the treatment of another 29 gay teenagers for mental problems because they've been bullied. And why have they been bullied? because the so-called moral religious conservatives and the focus on the family people in that town have threatened the school board. They've told the school board that they will unelect them if they pass regulations preventing bullying, and the school board has told teachers you can't stop it. And even Michelle Bachmann, their congressman, got up in front of the state legislature and argued against an anti-bullying law because she said it would deny Christians their right to criticize gay people. That's the kind of evil that comes out of rigid morality based on some rule from on high that some authority interprets for his or her own gain. There is terrible, terrible evil that's done in the world based on some sort of a moral argument. That's why we need situational ethics. We have to look at each case differently and find out what's the best outcome there, and not just rigidly apply rules that change behavior and have terrible impacts on people.
You know, last I checked, the Ten Commandments says thou shalt not steal. But Patrick, obviously you're engaging in a vicious lie by suggesting that conservatives are either involved in this exclusively, some of them are, or that conservatives advocate this. And I could rattle off just as many atrocity stories smearing. This? Excuse me, Patrick.
I'm sorry. I didn't know. I don't rattle off.
No, wait a minute. Then let me clarify.
Okay.
I could list off just as many atrocity stories implicating liberal people involved in these same things and somehow implying by guilt by association that liberalism stands for these things. But I'm not going to do that because what you're talking about is the fall in human nature. It has nothing to do with anything that conservatives or Christians advocate. And to suggest that, to bring up specific examples of terrible behavior and to hold that up and say, look, this is what conservatives do, or they advocate, because some conservatives have been involved in it, is a vicious, damnable lie. And it is a terrible, it's a terrible, divisive and uninstructive way to look at what actually are real public policy issues that everyone cares about. And just because some liberal says, well, I care about something, when in fact they're involved in it and they let it happen, that, you know, it's almost like it gets to, in a sense, the very ethics I'm talking about. By publicly standing up and saying, I care about this particular wrong, it's almost, that's enough. You don't have to do anything about it. But I want to get back to your contention that because you're not a woman, you have no right to take a moral position on abortion, even though you did say you felt that it was moral.
No, I said that I leave it up to the woman to take the position, that I don't think it's moral.
Well, do you leave it up to...
I give them the freedom
do you leave it up to do you leave it up to any sort of... it's an absurd position if you think about it, Patrick, because it's like saying because certain groups of people are involved in activities that I'm not involved in or that I can't be involved in for whatever reason, therefore I have no right to make a moral judgment on it. Of course you have a right to make a moral judgment. It doesn't mean you have a right to tell somebody what they can do, but you have to make moral judgments. You're not involved necessarily. Like, I'm not involved in situations like honor killings because I'm not a Muslim, but I'm going to take a moral position on it. This would be ludicrous for you to say that. You absolutely can and should take moral positions on situations that you're not involved in.
It's interesting, Chuck. Whenever I cite facts that disprove something you've said, you call it a vicious lie. So I'm waiting now for all the examples of all the terrible things that liberals have done. Okay.
All right, I'll do that, Patrick, even though I don't think that that's an instructive conversation because I don't see things this way. I'm not going to make a long list of things that liberals have done and advocated that have been destructive because I don't think, therefore, that this defines liberalism. I don't think that, therefore, this is evidence that all liberals believe in this. I view it as an aberration. So I could do that very easily, and I'm sure you know I could. It wouldn't be too difficult. I can't do it right now off the top of my head. I'll have to work on it maybe after we start the show today. But it's not really, it kind of puts me into your playing field. It gets me involved in the kind of argument that I don't make. I don't claim that all liberals are involved in these terrible practices because I can and certainly would be able to quote several liberals who have been or who have advocated things. Because that's not how I view it.
Well, I'm not saying all conservatives are either. What
yes,
I'm saying is that when you rigidly apply rules, you can have terrible outcomes, and here's an example of rigidly applying rules and having a terrible outcome. I'm merely providing evidence to back up my case. You haven't provided any evidence to back up your case, so I'll just hold it in abeyance.
Well, no,
I would point out that I did give you a moral statement on abortion. I don't think it's immoral, but I gave you an additional subtlety, which is it's up to a woman to decide for herself whether or not it's moral. She can make that decision independent of me.
Yeah, there are many rigidly held positions that I could point to liberals taking, which I would contend are not positive. I mean, we just talked about one in the first hour, the business of the government telling Catholic institutions that they have to provide chemical abortions. That's a rigid position.
They didn't tell them that. You're misconstruing it. There you go again, Chuck.
Well, now they've changed their mind. Now they've changed their mind.
No, that's
but that
not what
was
they
the
said.
issue.
That's not what they said. They said that
all right,
Catholic
Patrick, I'll get the
have
quotes.
to provide insurance that will cover birth control. Nobody said anything about abortions, and nobody said they had to provide.
No, I said chemical abortions and sterilizations. No, I said chemical abortions and sterilizations as part of the coverage that they will have to provide their employees. That's a pretty rigid position. I mean, we could talk about rigid positions. I want to reintroduce the topic here. Last week, Patrick and I had a controversy over his refusal to take a moral position on abortion. He has now taken the position 1 week later that it is moral, firstly, but secondly, that he doesn't have a right to take a position on it because he's not a woman, so therefore, as a man, he has no right to make a judgment. I wonder what else, Patrick, you don't think you have a right to take a position on because you're not of a certain something. But we'll put that aside. You're bringing up another bugbear, if you will, in our program, which is that everything bad and corrupt and greedy and powerful must be conservative, which I think is actually much more of an insight into your worldview, and that everything that stands for goodness must be progressive. And to suggest that progressives don't take rigid stands on things, I mean, really, Patrick. First of all, there's nothing wrong with taking a strong stand on something. The question is, what is it that you're taking a strong stand on? And bringing up an anecdote like advocating abstinence education, blaming that for problems with children, I don't know what else they were doing in that school system. We'd have to take a look at it. I wonder if they weren't advocating life education. Have you ever heard of that, Patrick?
I have, and I got a correction in an email here which said that there were 9 suicides in the Anoka school districts of gay students over 2 years, and students were told not to support homosexuals or they would be fired. So I stand corrected on that.
Were they teaching life education? My question is actually a pretty serious question because my friend Sam Blumenfeld did some articles on this, and he did some research on it, where he showed that school departments that were teaching life education, what they euphemistically call life education, but what was at first called death education, there's an increase in suicides, and he points specifically to South Boston, which in the 1990s had several very strange suicides and suicide pacts, and it turned out that they were offering this so-called life education. So it's a complicated issue, and there are mistakes made, and by the way, that would be a progressive thing. And I think that, but to suggest that somehow conservatives would be on this bad side of things, that they, it's not only ludicrous, but it's actually very, very ugly. And it's the kind of scurrilous charge that it's not instructive. It's not going to help get into actual discussions about what can be done. It's like saying that all the Jews are involved in something. It's a worldview that conservatives don't have. In a sense, we're at a disadvantage in that way because we don't see it that way. We will admit when we've done something wrong. Conservatives recognize the fallen nature of human beings, so that only fuels the other side by saying, you see, they did this. When the progressive side is not accountable because progressives couldn't possibly be involved in any of these things because it would run against their ideology after all. But why don't we go to the emails?
Well, first of all, I've never heard of life education, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, we'll have Sam on. He'll talk about it. That's a very good topic. It's a very interesting
school had sex education in which they excluded all mention of homosexuality or contraceptives. And so, and thirdly, I wasn't saying that all conservatives are evil and are responsible for these things. I was citing one particular situation within one particular school district that was made worse by one particular set of evangelical Christians who wanted to apply their strict morals to a school district and who threatened to get the school district fired if they didn't get their way, and their way led to the suicide of 9 students. So that's one particular instance. And I don't say that liberals never do dumb things. Liberals do a lot of dumb things, and I also never say that liberals are not rigid sometimes. Liberals can be very rigid and really stupid, and there are times when I call them out on it, too, and I get into arguments with my own friends over some of the really stupid, rigid things they do, too. And particularly when my liberal friends say, you talk to a conservative? How could you do that? And I point out that, conservatives are human beings, too, and sometimes they know more than we do, and sometimes they're right. I think the world needs a little bit of both. What I do object to is the application of what conservatives call morals to every situation in a rigid way, and their dismissal of what I call morals and the flexibility to apply them in different situations in different ways. So I think we're having a difference over what we call morals and how they're applied. And I don't know, Mike, you're the theologian here. What do you think of the position that I'm taking in this case?
Well, I think there's something to be said for situation ethics, there's no question. And I can think of examples, for example, one coming to mind just quickly, again from the Hebrew Bible, when Solomon, young son of King David, was given the throne, given the authority and responsibility, and God spoke to him according to the scriptures and saying, "What do you ask for?" And Solomon said very quietly and in the tone of saying, "I am young, I am not capable. I ask for one thing from God, to have the ability to understand what is right and what is wrong." And there's a famous story that came to him, situation ethics, if you will. 2 women came and saying, "This is my child." And both women were claiming that the baby was hers. And so there is that famous story as to how Solomon was able to adjudicate that situation. But I think I also look at it basically, and I think the three of us this afternoon talking about this come from the point of view of a parent. A child is born. A child begins to understand, listen, make noise, begin to take actions. And I think as a parent, whether it be mother or father, we do in the very beginning feel, at least I feel, that we need to have some universal principles in the very beginning, which over time get modified as we see that child begin to make good decisions about life. And then we perhaps may mitigate or modify it. So I think there are occasions, situation ethics, if you will, where we do have recourse to universal judgments with people.
I won't disagree with you there, but my sources of those universal judgments are far broader than the ones I hear on this show from you and Chuck. You keep referring to Christian documents, and I look at a much larger sweep of history and a much larger swath of civilization, and probably that's just because I've lived in a lot of other countries and seen that there are other ways of going about things here too. And I've also seen ways in which both conservative and liberal applications of narrow morality has had bad outcomes. And I try as much as possible to make those decisions based upon what's good for the people involved, what's good for our nation, and what's good for the world. I reject what I've heard some Christian preachers say, that humanity has dominion over life and therefore strip mines are fine and get out of the way. I mean, what I've seen is that morality is twisted by all people, not just by conservatives, that morality is twisted to meet temporal ends. And I think if you look at the outcomes rather than at the rules, you can avoid a lot of that twisting of morality for temporal ends. We have an email here from...
but can I just weigh in?
Yeah, sure,
I've never heard a Christian minister say strip mines are fine. The only person I've ever heard defend strip mines is Al Gore's father, who was the CEO of Occidental Petroleum a liberal company and a liberal head, and who was involved in strip mines and poisoning Love Canal. Al Gore still gets a check from that foundation every year. So if you could give me an example of a Protestant minister who said strip mines are okay, I'd like to see that. But I think you're quite right, Patrick, in that you say that you have your morality and I have mine, and that we're debating them. That's obviously true. We've been debating them since we've known each other.
Right.
And at least you're acknowledging that both sides can be rigid. It's not exclusive. What I reject, though, is your insulting remark that somehow you're more broad-minded, that you have a broader view than conservatives. I doubt that. I haven't seen it.
What I said was I draw on many more sources than just the Judeo-Christian sources. And whether or not
I don't
more
think
broad-minded.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Different.
I mean, I don't believe there's any evidence to suggest that progressives are more broad-minded, hardly, than conservatives, and that conservatives don't draw from a lot of sources. They're very much in the world. I mean, this is just one of these kind of stereotypes that's not only insulting, but it diminishes. It's like saying that conservatives are stupid. Why don't we go to the emails?
Well, what very interesting email here from Sanderson Haley in Phoenix, and she says, why is it so important to Chuck that Patrick take a moral stand? That's a good question.
Well, because we're talk show hosts, and this is not, by the way, a left-wing talk show. It's not. This isn't NPR. I'm a right-wing talk show host. This is AM. This is partially AM radio. And generally conservatives like to know where people stand morally on any number of issues. It's just, it's more of a matter of integrity. It's a matter of honesty, really. We should know, especially people who are presenting themselves in the public world, and in our own small way, Patrick and I are doing that by doing a talk show. We should know what their morality is. There should be no kind of waffling on that. We should be. I'm prepared to discuss my morality on any topic that I can think of. At least, I'm not going to answer personal questions, of course, but on issues of public importance or issues of public discourse, you absolutely want to know what someone's morality is, and if someone's vying for a position of influence in our culture, whether it be political leadership or cultural, you darn right you want to know what their morality is, and you should ask.
Well, I can't argue with that. I can argue, however, with its application, at least by some of the current candidates for the Republican presidency who have gone to great lengths to either disguise or misconstrue or change their morality based on the situation. But, no, I agree. Well, if you're going to be a public person,
we should smoke them out.
Your ideas clear.
If they're changing their morality, we should smoke them out. And same thing with President Obama. We should absolutely know in clear and explicit terms what their moral stance is on any public policy issue. Well, that should be a given.
Well, when you say moral stance, though, you keep. I suspect you're referring to the conservative idea of what a moral stance is. And
no, not
and I suspect
necessarily.
you're going to reject the liberal idea, at least my idea, is that of a moral stance.
No, not necessarily. I think moral stances transcend religion. A moral stance is your position on the environment. Any of these questions, public policy matters, what you feel about them, why. That's just that should be part of any discourse, especially in people who have influence.
Okay, and also on stealing homes and killing people in illegal wars.
Oh,
and,
right. You mean the conservative position,
things like that too.
Yes, of course. So you mean Patrick? You mean the conservative positions? In other words, those being the great causes of the conservative movement, stealing homes. Yes, sure. Let's take a look at the banks that are doing that, and let's ask whether or not they're liberal or conservative anyway. That's, again, you're crossing into smear territory here, Patrick.
No, I don't think
so
at all. I think I'm crossing into territory.
I definitely think so.
Whenever I get into banks, you seem to say it's
I've been talking about banking
and the Attorney Generals have not reached a bargaining situation with them now, an agreement
Patrick,
with them now.
I've been talking, in case you haven't noticed.
For their crimes, and the Attorney General
wait a minute, now you've said a personal remark.
Crimes.
In case you haven't noticed, I have been talking about banking and currency quite a bit, especially this past month, as I study it. It certainly as much as you, if not more. I'm actually looking into this topic. And to suggest that conservatives aren't talking about this and liberals are, that's ridiculous. These are crimes. If somebody is stealing a mortgage, I mean, where do you get off saying that banks who are stealing mortgages from people, first of all, that they're conservative, stealing homes or whatever, first of all, that they're conservative? That's ludicrous. And secondly, that conservatives support that?
Conservatives in Congress.
Really? Like who?
They're being supported and defended by the conservatives in Congress who have done everything.
All right. You're telling me that a conservative in Congress supports. You're telling me that a conservative in Congress supports a bank stealing someone's home. Can you give me an example of that?
Yes. And first of all, it's not what I said. I said that conservatives in Congress have done everything to allow the banks to avoid being prosecuted for the crimes they commit. They have cut the budget of the SEC. They have they have stopped appointments to various commissions that will go after the banks. They have held up the appointment to the Consumer Protection Commission until the president finally had to do a recess appointment. They have done everything they can to protect the banks from being prosecuted from stealing millions of homes. And now it's up to the attorney generals of 4 states to see to it they get prosecuted. And I have to say I'm very sorry that that my administration, the Obama administration, is actually siding with the conservatives on this one. But yes, they are protecting people.
No, they're not siding. He's not siding with it. Patrick, he's not siding with the conservatives. There has been malfeasance on all sides. I mean, you just read Dylan Ratigan's book. He talks about this. It's nothing to do with conservatives. It has to do with the big banks, and as you know, I've talked about currency and its influence, buying influence in government. And they buy both sides. It's not a conservative thing. This is, for you to try to phrase it in that way and to then use this to slam and to slander a political view, that's not instructive, Patrick. That's not going to get to the problem. The problem is that the big banks have corrupted both sides. Fannie and Freddie is an example. That was the biggest banking institution in history, holding more mortgages than any industry ever, and they were protected by people like Barney Frank and Chris Dodd. I mean, we can look at both sides. It has nothing to do with conservatives. Conservatives are not in favor of banks stealing homes. The banks doing this.
They defend them.
No, not anymore. As I said, not any more than liberals. Not any more than liberals. It's not a conservative issue. It is an issue of, and I'm going to go around the merry-go-round again. It is an issue of the banks corrupting the process and buying both sides, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, Barney Frank and a conservative congressman. It has nothing to do with conservatism. It has to do with corruption.
Conservatism, that's true, and you're right that they are buying both sides. But why is it then that it's conservative Republicans who continually shoot down laws that would stop the banks from buying members of Congress? They're the ones who won't let us get money out of politics. The Democrats are all for it.
Patrick,
the Democrats have introduced 2 bills.
You just read Dylan Ratigan's book. No. You just read Dylan Ratigan's book. Both sides have shot down these laws, going all the way back to 2008. It was Timothy Geithner. I mean, I can't quote it exactly, but he shot down an ability of the government to regulate foreign banks' investments. We could take a look at the Obama administration. It's both sides doing it. It is not conservative congressmen. It is both sides of Congress. It's not a conservative issue.
Well, we're getting a little bit off of morals here. No.
This is very important because you're trying to make this into a conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican thing, and doing so by in not even implicitly but explicitly saying, and you started with this, conservatives support banks stealing homes from people. I mean, this gets to a very left-right view. The left cannot possibly be involved in that because the left is good, even if individual leftists might be involved in this. They're aberrations. They've acted, as you said, Obama's acting conservative. He's siding with the conservatives, I guess. Not that he's doing it because he's just as much a part of it. It couldn't possibly be the case.
Well, if you recall, this all started with me saying that I'll discuss morals, but I want to discuss my morals as well as your morals. And in this case, my morals are that we do not allow this kind of theft going on, but conservatives have a tendency not to want to talk about that. They want to talk about homosexuality and teenage birth and that kind of stuff. I say, no, let's talk about robbery. Let's talk about corporate theft. Let's talk about illegal invasion of countries. Let's talk about things that I think are immoral. That's not off the table, and I'm not going to be in a conversation that takes that off the table.
It's nonsense to suggest the conservatives aren't concerned about those things.
They don't want
That's
to talk
just
about
false.
them. They don't include them in
That's
their moral,
also nonsense.
worldview.
I haven't seen. No, that's absolutely
not what Focus
ridiculous,
on the
Patrick.
Family talks about. That's not what all of the so-called moral organizations out there scream and yell about.
That's not their issue of study. I mean, their issue of
it's
study
my
is...
issue, and that's what I'm going to talk about when you
Well,
bring up
that's fine. Every group... No, wait a minute. Every group... You're saying that does every liberal group have to talk about what you think? I mean, different groups focus on different disciplines. That's ridiculous.
But we're having
one group is
between you and I. And
no.
About morals,
the fact
talk
is,
about the whole range of them.
As do conservatives. To suggest that conservatives don't want to talk about stealing and that liberals are going to champion that is ridiculous. And to then point to a conservative group...
They'll talk about throwing in jail the person who steals a loaf of bread from the grocery store because they're hungry. What they don't want to talk about
but they won't talk about banks stealing homes. That's ridiculous, Patrick. Shame on you for saying that. And also
not shame on me. Shame on you for ignoring it.
To say that a social agency that focuses on family, psychology, and you talk about focusing on the family. James Dobson is a psychologist, and I'm not here to defend him, but I'm just saying that that's his area of expertise. His life work is psychology, and he talks about applying psychology within the context of a Christian biblical view. His area of expertise is not banking. I mean,
but
this
his
is
Christian
ludicrous,
view should
Patrick,
come from Christ, and Christ was the one who talked about taking care of the poor people, and Christ is the one who talked about it's harder for a rich man to get to heaven than a poor man. It's Christ who emphasized taking care of poor people and doing unto people as you would have them do unto you. Christ didn't talk about homosexuality. He didn't talk about abortion, but that's all James Dobson talks about. I condemn James Dobson for being immoral. That's
his area of expertise. That is his area of expertise. To suggest that he should also talk about other areas that are not his area of expertise, I mean, that's silly. I mean, look, the American psychological...
And that's what his God talks most about.
And by the way, he does defend the poor.
Never discussed.
Does the American Psychological Association talk about banking corruption? I mean, it's not their area of expertise, nor should they. Their area of expertise is psychology.
But he claims to be Christian, and that's what Christ talked about. Christ didn't talk about
I'm sorry, Patrick, that he's not talking about publicly, at least it's not the main focus of his ministry, all of the issues. That doesn't mean that he's not concerned about stealing. It just means that his particular issue, given the fact that he's a psychologist, is studying psychology. It's not any more than the American Psychological Associations. Their main focus is psychology. The Carnegie Institute of International Peace, so-called, their focus is international peace. Are they talking about banks stealing homes? No, nor should they. I mean, every group has their own particular focus.
They do talk about flows of capital and flows of labor that can lead to wars.
Yeah, usually in a way that helps the big bankers, by the way, and we could talk about that. But the fact is that, different organizations have different areas of expertise. To try to smear and say, oh, well, they're not talking about... That's ridiculous. It's not intellectually honest.
If he's going to call himself a Christian, he's got to talk about what Christ talked about. Christ didn't talk about abortion, didn't talk about homosexuality. He talked about helping poor people, and that's exactly what James Dobson doesn't talk about.
Well, I disagree with you on that. And, well, fine. I think you can show where Christ did talk about. I'm not here to talk about what Christ talked about, but the New Testament endorses entirely the Old Testament, says it can never be changed. There can never be, the Bible is immutable, it's forever, it was, is, and will be. And the Old Testament, the Jewish Testament, does.
Well, I'm sorry, Chuck, but the Bible's been rewritten dozens of times. Hundreds of pieces of the Bible have been thrown out in the Fourth Synod. It is anything but immutable. In fact, King James had a whole Bible written just to satisfy his political ambitions. The Bible is not immutable. Sorry,
you just read that. You just read that in John Barry's book, Patrick.
I did.
And that's an opinion. Because I saw that too. Anyway, why don't we let Mike chime in here? Mike?
Yeah, Mike.
Oh, my. What to say here, but I just continue to think that for me, morality is clear thinking. How's that?
I like that.
Very good. That's very, very good. Clear thinking is what we're all about.
We've got a lot of emails which we're not going to get to. I want to thank everybody for trying.
Okay. I think that wraps things up for today, Patrick. We'll talk tomorrow, Fairness Radio with Chuck and Patrick. Mike Iwanowicz, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Our Lady of Sorrows Roman Catholic Church.